Today on the show, we are talking about something that most of us are very, very uncomfortable with. We are talking about the uncomfortable truth and the fact that failure is a real part of any successful person's journey. Think about the most successful person that you have ever seen or somebody whose success motivates you and inspires you. I promise you that that person has stories of things that they can talk to you about that they tried, they planned, and executed to the best of their training, ability, and education. And they'll tell you that that, by all measures, was a failure. But here's what I've learned. Failure isn't something that you recover from. Sometimes failure can actually be a really powerful thing that clears the way for something better, a much improved version of the original plan to emerge. Today on the show, we are going to talk about how to set your failures and see them as detours. We're going to demystify what it is about failure that makes us so afraid of it and then makes it such a powerful endpoint in our journeys. I'm going to talk to you about my own experiences with things that I've experimented with and failed. Let's talk about how you can own your comeback with not perfection, but clarity, purpose, and courage. Let's get into it. Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Success in Doses. Thank you for choosing us, this podcast, to start your Monday and your week off with us. The conversation today is going to focus on something that we avoid at all costs, as we should. As a driven individual, I know that there's the saying, fail forward, fail often, as many times as you can, but fail forward. There are so many slogans, like I could literally go on and on and on and on about it. But reality is that nobody fails and celebrates their failure. The smartest people and the folks that are most successful and have studied failure really, really well and deeply, even they will admit that in their journey to securing success, failure continues to be that thing that they stay hypervigilant of. Nobody lays a plan where they think about, okay, how are we going to highlight the failure? How are we going to do that? No, everyone plans with being in mind that failure could come and they need to be prepared for the eventuality of how they are going to recover from that. If it's your first time here, welcome to the show. I am your host, Saley. I am a pharmacist, a mom, and entrepreneur. I am a passionate individual who loves to see people succeed. The entire idea behind this podcast, it's because of all the years of working with student pharmacists and working with young professionals transitioning from residency into their young professions in healthcare and seeing how afraid everyone is of failing and how apprehensive everyone is about embarking on their journey to success. And so this show was designed and is always designed with the goal in mind of having really candid conversations and conversations that I know from experience we are all having, whether we're having it with our friends or not, but we're constantly thinking about how we can make sure we set up all of our goals and our big dreams and big plans to make sure that failure is something that we don't get. Before we jump into today's episode, you know exactly what I'm going to ask of you. I'm going to ask of you to share this episode, to like this episode, and talk to your circle of friends and family about the podcast. We would like to become discoverable on all of the platforms as a podcast that helps people start their week on a high note with insightful, thought-provoking conversation. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and please don't forget to share the podcast. And so to begin, we really have to kind of reevaluate and think about why, as people, we are so afraid of failure. I'm not going to psychotherapy you on this episode, but I'm going to talk to you about my own personal journey and relationship with failure. For a very long time, I was afraid to talk about ResiPrep 360. This is a company that started for me as a passion project, and all of you know this, but I was really apprehensive about talking about talking about the business and talking about the fact that I was helping student pharmacists successfully secure residency. And the fear of talking about the program didn't come from anything else except what if I start talking to people about this thing that I'm doing and I start getting a lot of people interested in it and I can't help scale it, right? I was really, really afraid of failing at this thing on a large scale. And I think when I go back and I think about that, it really all started for me and my relationship with failure, like with being afraid to fail when I failed in an arena that I'd always been successful in, which is academics. And so, for anyone who doesn't know this story, I went to a 3 year program, a pharmacy school, where passing was 85 and not 70 or 75. So, people who say C's get farm D's, I cannot relate to that. I cannot relate to that. My farm D was earned with a B plus. Okay. Because in our program, everyone had to take an exam every 2 weeks and passing was 85 or better. This was not really a concept that I was scared of because school was my thing. This is where in this arena, I have performed consistently very, very well. And in a course or in a pharmacy program where at the time you had to take 36 exams to get through the didactic course. So 2 weeks around a year, we took these exams and I was successful at securing 85 or better over 96% of the time. And the one exam that I didn't pass by the school's metric, by the way, I got like an 82 or something like that. It shattered my confidence. Not passing this exam put my graduating on time in jeopardy. And I remember carrying a lot of like shame. I feel like failing and that failure being such a public thing affected me deeper than I allowed myself to think about. It affected me in a much more profound way that years later, where I can openly talk about it and discuss it, thanks to therapy. I really didn't take the time and energy at the time to do the work that was necessary to understand why I was so hurt and disappointed and ashamed of myself for failing one exam. And I think it had a lot to do with also the environment, the culture at the school. It wasn't one where not passing was something that was normalized, right? As they shouldn't. They want us to pass. They want us to pass every single exam. But not passing one exam, I would later find out, put this fear in my heart about experimenting and trying that never existed before. But also, it forced me or it affected me by thinking and realizing that in a place like school where I had always succeeded and realizing that failure, even in something that I was excellent at, was a reality. Today, I can look back on that experience and say, thank God I failed early. Thank God that I went into residency with some experience with failure. Thank God for that because to imagine an alternative version of my story where my first real bout with failure was, say, NAPLEX, I would have been shattered in a way where I don't know I would have been able to recover. Because to get into the dream residency and not be able to keep it because I couldn't pass NAPLEX, that would have destroyed my life. I'm not even going to hold you. It would have been fundamentally destructive for my professional career. But having that happen to me in pharmacy school and coming back the semester after that and facing 9 more exams in order to graduate. And I remember doing so exceptionally well the semester after that because it kind of something woke up in me. I realized that all of the work that I'd done to get to that point in my career, I can't just erase all of that. I can't erase the fact that I have been top of my class all the way up until that moment. I couldn't erase the fact that school, exams, sitting down in a classroom with a bunch of other people, learning the same material and then being tested on it and being able to deliver on those endpoints just like anyone else, that was a reality for me. That was true. Taught me how to objectively look at my journey and be able to isolate that, yes, this I didn't do well on. This didn't work out the way I wanted to, but there are things that I could hold on to that I knew for a fact I did execute well on. And I'm not going to give this one moment, this point in time, so much power that all of the work that I have done to this point, I would equate all of that to zero. Basically, I was not going to let my failure of one exam define the rest of my career at that school and all the work I'd done at that school. I wasn't going to allow my time at that school to be defined by this one thing. And so when you listen to all of these successful people and their journeys and failure, and what they talk about is how there can be career defining failures, but essentially what makes something career defining for you is how you see it and how you interpret it and the power you give that moment. I'm not going to lie. That moment was heavy. It was heavy for a long time, and I carried it for a long time with me. But to come back the next semester and how I was able to do that is still something I look back on today, and I am so incredibly proud of myself for being able to do it. So the doses that I want to talk about today and the tips that I want to talk to you about today is really about the fact that unless you're just not taking any risks and you are staying in an arena where everything you do and how you do it is light work. You are in your comfort zone. You are an autopilot. You are assured that you can see the next steps, the next 10 steps ahead of you. Doing any one of those things differently, you are traveling with failure side by side with you. Because approaching my career now with the understanding that failure is something that lives in all of my ambitious pursuits and everything I want to do, failure is a real part of that. And failure could come up at any time in that journey has been transformative for me because it not only allows me to plan strategically, understanding that failure could happen, but I'm also planned for failure. I also plan for the fact that if I launch this podcast and the listenership is poor, what are some strategies I'm going to employ to try to change that? You understand? Going for a promotion, if I don't get that promotion, what are some things that are going to happen? What are some moves that I can make sure that the outcome I want, I can still guarantee it? So the moral of the story is that as long as you are ambitious, as long as you are going after bigger and better things, as long as you are evaluating your journey and thinking about what you can do differently and better, you need to know that failure is always in your orbit. And failure is always something that you are going to have to deal with and manage. And so in that journey of overcoming success, and what I wanted to give you today as valuable feedback is that failure is part of the growth journey. Anyone who is honest with you will tell you this, but it doesn't have to define you. And for you to learn how to regain that momentum that embarked you on that journey in the first place, here are 5 things that I employ and have continued to employ in my career that have been very, very instrumental and transformative in helping me stay grounded and focused in my ambitious pursuits. And the first of these is let it hurt. It is the most hypocritical thing that I can do here to sit here and tell you when you fail, you need to just bounce back. You need to go right back into work mode and it's going to hurt. And if you don't have a lot of experience with failure and this is a first time failure for you, the pain can almost be debilitating. I remember after that incident in school, trying to get out of bed every day, get ready to go to school, and just feeling like my body would not participate because it was such a task to show up that next semester because of how shame got. I can't even put into words the weight of the shame I carried. But with every passing day and every subsequent exam, I believe like those last exams, I didn't pass a single one under a 90 or 95. Like I was crushing it, but it was really, really hard. You have to sit with that hurt. You have to acknowledge the sting. Denying what just happened to you is not going to work. So you have to give yourself room and time to feel the loss. But I do not want you to sit here too long, because if you sit in anything too long, you normalize it for yourself and it could become too comfortable. It could become almost too easy to just sit there, because taking the next step to get out of the hurt, you know how difficult that is, right? You don't need to rebrand in 2 days after you get fired, for example, right? Like that's not where the rebranding needs to happen. For those first couple of days, it's going to hurt. You're going to be just confused by what just transpired, but you need to let it hurt. You may need some rest. You may need a little bit of therapy, but whatever you need. My first dose of how I overcame that was to just sit in that pain for a bit and feel it, and then re-emerge with a strategy of how I was going to overcome what had just happened to me. The second thing I want to give you as a pearl of how to overcome monumental failure is separate your identity with the outcome. I started to think that I hadn't just failed, but I was a failure. There is a huge distinction between what happens to you and you claiming the event as now your sole identity, right? When you tie your ability to match to your identity, when you don't match, it could be really, really earth shattering for you, right? So the way you have to see your failure is this is an outcome, but it does not define my identity as a person. I see this happen a lot when people go through the match and they don't match at phase one. They get stuck in the phase one outcome and they don't realize that phase two literally starts like 2 hours after phase one results. All this time and energy you are spending in the hurt and the shame, you are basically missing out on an opportunity to strategize and regroup about how you are going to go right back into it and figure out how you're going to make sure that phase two goes differently, right? Think about affirmations. And I think this is where the power of affirmation can be transformative after failure or after a monumental loss. I am worthy. I am capable of doing hard things. I think you guys have heard me say this. This is my affirmation. It's been my affirmation for so long. I can do hard things. I have done hard things before, and I can do hard things always and again. This is really difficult, but I have done difficult things. I've gotten through difficult things. I can get through this as well. When you start talking to yourself in that manner and you start thinking about yourself in that manner, the event loses its significance in a way. The weight of it decreases in a way because you see the event for exactly what it is. It's a result. It's a result. It's an outcome of particular decisions and certain choices that you made. And this is the outcome that you secured from that. So go back to the drawing board and make different choices and different decisions so you can secure a different outcome. But for this, I think it's very important that you separate the outcome from your identity. You are not equal your failures by any measure, right? And so being able to do that is very, very important. The third thing is when failure hits you, trust me, in the beginning, it's difficult to see, but there is a lesson in there. There is something in there that you are meant to learn from the experience. But because failure is such an emotionally charged experience, we oftentimes can't even bring ourselves to critically evaluating what went wrong and how we can tweak things and how we can recalibrate our plans and go right back in, right? Failure is a data point. And there are a bunch of data points along that journey. There are all these different things that you can isolate and think about and see to be able to identify this point in the journey is where the modification lives. And this person not being on my team and bringing that person on my team is how I'm going to transform what just happened, right? And then think about some actionable items that can come out of the failure, right? There are always these three things. There are three questions that I always ask myself immediately after something I've tried was not successful or after a major failure, right? I learned this later on. I wish I had this tool when I was going through school. But later on, I learned these three questions always help me reframe the failure. Question number one is, what was in my control? I need to isolate those things. The things that were within my means and I had opportunities to do, these were the control. These were all of the variables that I was able to control. What are they? Because this is where my strength is going to come from, because I know that there's some power still here. I'm not going to give up my power to this outcome. So, what was in your control? Once you can clearly identify what was in your control, the next question and answering that is slightly more easier, right? What will I do differently next time? Isolating the things that were in your control is going to help you figure out what you can do differently next time. And that ushers you right into finding out what were the things I was surprised by? What caught me off guard? Where did this journey catch me slipping? Because the things you were surprised about, and the reason why that's so important is that's where the knowledge gap is. The things that surprised you, they may have surprised you sometimes because of lack of planning, right? Adequate planning. You underestimated how much work and effort needed to go into certain pieces of the journey, and you were caught off guard by something. Figuring out what that something is quickly can be very powerful in how you recalibrate your plan to try again, right? Maybe that's what it was. You underestimated a component. Maybe it was a true deficit in your knowledge, right? Like you genuinely just didn't know certain things. You genuinely just needed to get a little bit more education. You needed to get maybe some mentorship. Maybe you needed to invest in additional resources to guide you through the journey. But you were surprised because you genuinely had no idea that this was something you needed to prepare for, or this was something you needed to control, right? You leave that shame on the side, right? I'm not going to tell you to eliminate the shame. That's a place you get to. But if this is your first bout with failure, I am so sorry to tell you that shame is really going to be present. You're going to be aware of its presence, unfortunately, but you have to find a way to keep that in check and try to answer these three questions, because these three questions usher you into my fourth tip. And that is, you need to rebuild with intention. I remember having to completely rethink the way I study and prepare for my exams after failing. How did I prepare for this exam? Was it practice questions? Was it just a slide? What did I do? And how can I do that differently using those three questions to help me? What surprised me on the exam, and how can I get better command of those things, right? But now that you faced it and you felt it, you've learned from it, the next thing is to go and recalibrate this plan with intention now. You don't have to rise the same way you fail. No, you don't. In fact, I would strongly advocate that when you resurface after the failure, that you resurface differently, right? And so the only way that you resurface differently and with intention is if a little bit of strategy went into that, and a little bit of critical evaluation of the failure and how it happened actually takes place. When you do that, the journey is kind of going to be different because you're better prepared this time. The things that surprised you last time can't surprise you again because you put some strategic things in place to prepare for that. And the fifth thing I have for you on bouncing back from failure is rewrite the narrative. Rewrite the narrative, right? If you don't rewrite the narrative for yourself, then the failure gets to win, because the narrative that takes hold in your mind is then going to be that you couldn't cut it. You didn't have what it takes. All of the silly thoughts that go through your mind, right? But rewriting the narrative, the powerful thing in that is this narrative is written in a well-informed manner, right? You are resurfacing after the failure, after the shame, after all the pain that came from it. You went through strategic planning. You reevaluated what went wrong. You are a different beast in this race now. You're not the same person, right? I shared that every exam I came up against that semester after failing that last exam, I bodied them because it was almost like I had something to prove to myself. That confidence that got shattered, I was on a mission to reclaim it. And I realized later that simply passing the exam wasn't going to rebuild my confidence, right? But I was on the mission to prove to myself that I was still that person whose story still did include academic excellence, still did include academic exceptionalism. I didn't want to let go of that because that had been a part of my identity for so long. And now with this failure, I had to almost critically evaluate, was that still true about myself? It absolutely is. It absolutely is. One thing doesn't get the power to come in and redefine what you've known about yourself all along to be true, right? So don't let it. And so these are the things that I have personally employed in my professional career each time I've come up against failure. I've failed multiple times after that one failure in pharmacy school. I have embarked on projects trying to launch initiatives at work that fell flat, right? And those are public failures because those are not just failures within my department, but they're failures within the entire hospital or health system that I worked with, right? The thing with failure is that failure is just where the dust settles. It's not where the story ends. The way the story ends purely lies with you and the power you give failure. But when we start reframing failure and start rethinking about failure as a restructuring and a rebranding and a setup for a comeback that is better executed, that is well informed, in a way we take away that mystery and that power, that weight that failure often gets and the credit we often give failure. And so I wanted to create this episode and just encourage you. There's a lot of people going through a lot of first bouts with failure in this season with NAPLEX and MPJE prep and starting residency. And I just want to tell you that regardless of where you are right now in that journey, failure does not get to define the rest of your professional career. This is one chapter in a book that probably just like the introduction of your book hasn't even been written yet in your professional career as a pharmacist if you're a young professional starting out. The story hasn't begun, right? And so giving one incident like not passing NAPLEX in first try and not passing MPJE on first try, so much power that you just are unable to move forward and put your best foot forward thereafter. I really want to leave you encouraged today with this episode and understanding that it is okay. When you place board licensure in the context of the larger story of your life, this is not going to be what defines the person that you are, the person that you are in any community, in your family, in your friends' lives. This is not that. This is not that. And so I want to leave you extremely encouraged in knowing that go through this process, really isolate and sit down and work your way through your failure. You will realize that there is something to be learned on the other side of every failure. And there is something that could always happen differently in a much more improved version of this plan can be executed. And so I hope that that leaves you encouraged this week and every week thereafter, and that you know that you are not alone, because what I'm working on here is trying to build a community where anyone going through anything knows that they can come here and pick up something that will leave you a little bit more encouraged about how to go through your week in this journey. As always, thank you for joining me for another episode of Success in Doses, where I am avidly advocating to reframe our definition of success for ourselves, but success on a larger scale, and that it doesn't happen all at once. These things happen one step at a time, and those steps have to be carefully calibrated and planned in order for you to maximize your chances of success. I thank you for being here today and giving this episode a listen. If what you heard on this episode at all spoke to you, or you think there is someone that could benefit from an encouraging message this Monday morning, please share this episode with your friends, your co-residents, your classmates. If you are an RPD listening to this podcast, please share it with your residents and share it with your colleagues And I hope the message resonates with you. And I hope that this message finds you somewhere today where you needed somebody to tell you that you can still do this and that you still got it. As always, I wish you a wonderful, productive week and a week where shame, regret has no chance against you. Okay, bye.